we'll wait for another minute or two. Also, this probably has to come down. Okay, should we go ahead and get started so we can go out and have this beautiful day? Okay, Janae is going to help with the chalice lighting today. And I thought for the chalice lighting, we would actually read what our own vision is so that we remember, since we're talking about the budget. So the Olympia UU congregation envisions an interconnected world that is loving, just, and healthy. The congregation declares its mission to welcome and wonder, embrace and empower, bridge and become. So let's keep that in mind as we talk about money, which is always an adventure. So the first slide, I think this is the second slide, Carmen, maybe? There we go. Okay. So today what we're actually talking about is the aspirational budget and the budget process. I know that is super exciting to think about sitting on a sunny day and hearing about, so I really appreciate everybody being here. It's really great. And here, I think I can do this. And you probably have seen this. This is the graphic this year for the stewardship campaign, Rooted in Love. And it's about nurturing all that we love at OUUC. And I'm sure all of you have noticed all the hearts that are in the Commons. And we'll talk about this process a couple times, but one of the things we do is have small meetings anybody can come to where you have a chance to meet with a smaller group and talk about what OUUC means for you. And the purpose of that is to kind of remind us why we're willing to donate time and money and intention and everything else to OUUC. And so those hearts that are out in the Commons came about because stewardship gave everybody that had these cottage meetings a few minutes to sit and think about. And it always cracks me up because what they said was, you know, here's a heart, think about one or two words that OUUC makes you think of. And because we are the people we are, these are the one or two words people wrote, which were entire sentences, which is hilarious. You can read the ones that are out in the hallway. I just put a couple up here that I kind of randomly liked. My favorite one is the middle one. And they said, OUUC is a choose your own spiritual adventure with love at the center. And I thought that was a great definition of what we're here for. So we're going to talk about how we decide what we ask for and then how we figure out what to do with what pledges are given. I did forget to say my name is Susan Moon, and I'm the current chair of the Board of Trustees, and I am a late middle-aged woman with white hair and a blue and white dress. And then partway through, thank God, when we get to the numbers, I'm going to pass it off to the treasurer, John Cox, and he's going to finish. So I'm going to tell you the budget process just so that you understand how this works. If you don't know it, there's an OUUC governance manual on the web. You can read anytime you want to, though I'm not sure why you would. But if you're interested in governance in church, it's a great thing to know. It spells out all the processes. It tells us how we do things. All this timing is set ahead of time, so we are following a manual that helps us make sure we don't forget anything and that we kind of dot all our I's and cross all our T's. So the first part of the stewardship drive, in November, the staff starts working on the budget because the core of our building is the staff. And so they start thinking about what they want to do, what programs they would love to be able to have, what things they don't want to do anymore, and start coming up with ideas so that we can arrive at a budget. And then in January and February, as I said, we have these cottage meetings where we have small groups get together and talk about OUUC. And then the minister continues to work with the staff on the budget. And then in February, the proposed budget is shared with the board and we talk about it and set a pledge goal. And that's what we're talking about today, the aspirational budget. we try to imagine if we had everything we wanted, what would we be able to make happen? But we're also still the same people we are, which means we don't go really crazy. So we think about, what would be the nicest thing we could do, what could help OUUC, what will support people in things they talked about at the cottage meetings. And that's where the aspirational budget comes from, and that's where the pledge goal comes from. This year, the stewardship pledge goal is $726,479, which is, I think, the biggest amount we've ever asked for, so we're going to talk about that today. And then the stewardship pledge drive starts in February and goes to the last week in March. So next week is when the stewardship pledge drive ends. So we have the aspirational budget. We have what we actually get through stewardship pledges. And then the board spends April, often with several meetings, talking about how we make those two things work together. So we look at how much money we had, we look at how much money we asked for, and then we choose what we're going to use our money on and make the actual budget. Then the board approves the budget, and it's shared with the congregation 2 weeks before the budget forum. This year, the budget forum on June 7th is the one where everybody can come with all their line items and ask questions about dollars. And that's always a really in-depth meeting. And then the week after that, we have the church annual meeting where you can still ask questions, but it's not quite as in-depth as the one that's January 7th. And again, this is all spelled out in the governance manual to the point where it tells Reverend Mary when she needs to give us what the staff budget is. Everything is all spelled out there. So one of the things that we've done over the last couple of years is choose a big question. And we chose this big question because we wanted to have some way to measure what we're doing, what we're thinking about, and if it's going in the direction we want it to go. And we initially had talked about, while we were talking about this, we talked about, do we want to grow? Do we want to get bigger? And while we were having that discussion, what ended up happening was we were getting bigger anyway. So the question went from, do we want to get bigger, to how do we adapt to being a bigger congregation? Because we are bigger. These are the priorities for the board budget goals. If you look here, those are pictures of a lot of our staff. It's not all of them. There are caregivers for children and other people that are not included. But the staff is what we circled around and what we've been trying to make the priority this year. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. Before that, I know a lot of you have been on past boards, and we have in the last couple of years, we've kind of made a shift from trying to ask for just exactly what we need for the aspirational budget to actually trying to expand and ask for whatever we think the church is being led towards, and then kind of making those two things work together when we get the pledge drive. So that's one of the changes. And we are also working incrementally to eliminate the reliance on endowment draws and reserves for operational things. So those are the two kind of overall things that we've been working on the last couple of years. This year, we also have decided that staff and ministry is one of our most important things. As I'm sure most of you know, the majority of the budget every year is personnel. So what happens is, as you try to balance out the aspirational budget with the actual budget, one of the categories that it's easy to cut things from is the personnel budget. And so we wanted to really figure out if we were making the right choices, how our staff was comparing salary-wise, and how we were managing our staff. And a lot of this for the board is, it's really a way of living our values out loud. It's really, the way that we treat our staff should reflect the way we think the world should be. And so we really decided, we want to see, are we paying them the right amount? How do we even decide that? We ended up forming a staff compensation task force that did a lot of looking. And I know you're all going to be excited because I'm going to describe the UUA, which is our umbrella organization. It's the Unitarian Universalist Association. The UUA does a lot of things for us. They've led retreats, they give us advice, they do a lot of things that are helpful. And one of the things they do is create what they call a geo-index. And what that is I'm sure it happens in most other workplaces as well. You look around at the cost of living for the city where you're at, they look at the size of the church, they look at other variables, and come up with a salary range. And so one of the many things that the Staff Compensation Task Force did was look at that salary range as it relates to our church in Olympia to see how close we were to it. And what we found out is that nobody is even on the bottom of the range. So if the range is 1 to 10, we didn't have staff that were even at the 1 part. And so we started talking about how can we prioritize and get our staff up to the salary range that the UUA believes we should have. We are not going to be able to do this exactly in a year because it's a lot of money, but we felt that being informed about that and making good decisions is important, not only for us to live out our values, but also staff turnover is impacted. The more you are able to pay your staff equitably, the better staff you get. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that Reverend Mary is thinking about retiring in a few years. And the closer we have to paying our staff what is accepted at the UUA, the easier it's going to be for us to get somebody of good quality after Reverend Mary is ready to leave. So there are a lot of reasons to be really, and plus we just owe it to our staff to know how we're treating them, how far we are away from what the utopia would be. So they did a lot of work and came up with, that's where the most of our large pledge ask is to bring those salaries up to the minimum UUA. The other part of that that's important is that we have people, Troy's been here for 30 years. I don't remember how long Sarah's been here for, but it's a long time. None of them have any longevity increases. So there are a lot of things to think about to treat your staff well, and that really reflects everything about OUUC and makes OUUC a more stable place. So part of that, as I said, is to address the staff compensation, to provide cost of living adjustments and equitable benefits. And so that involves who gets medical insurance, who gets dental insurance. And again, it's a way of living out our values. And we're also asking this year for a quarter-time assistant minister to support the pastoral care and other things. We are growing. The easiest example for me to say is we have always had 1 or 2 new member classes a year, and now we have 3. So clearly the ministers have more work to do. Thursday night dinners haven't existed for more than 2 years, and look at, they have 65 to 85 people now at Thursday night dinners. So there's a lot going on. People are really excited about the way the church is working, and we need to make sure that we support our staff and make it possible for everybody to not get demoralized and quit because they're so tired. So that might be more from my own personal work experience than OUUC, but we all know that that happens. So our board budget goals this year were to, we're expanding worship offerings. A couple of years ago, during the pandemic, we just had 1 service. And then we got a little bit of money and decided to change to 2 services. And then we figured out another way to come up with more money, and we're able to make sure that we were going to have 2 services until June this year. If you've been here a lot, you see that both services are often quite full. We still have some people that sit out in the lobby sometimes. So keeping 2 services and possibly having a 3rd one is one of our goals. And for that, we would need an assistant minister, not necessarily to take on the 3rd service, but just to balance out the workload so that whoever wants to do the 3rd service is able to. We also want to maintain hybrid worship and engagement. So we want to keep the tech team here. We want to keep reaching out to people through the internet and watching this on YouTube. There may be 10 people here, but there may be 15 people that watch this later during the week or listen to it while they're doing dishes. So having that avenue of YouTube and the internet reaches a group of people that might not be able to come to church. I know there are several people that actually don't live here anymore that watch our service because they used to be here, and I know that there are a couple people who are housebound, and being able to come to the service virtually is a huge thing for them. We're also pretty conscious, because it's the board's job to think of the forest and the trees. We're also very conscious that we want to operate without structural deficits. We want to allow the endowment funds to grow without using it all, and we want to make sure that we have the reserves ready, because like any homeowner, owning a building means sometimes the furnace goes out. We're doing a lot of work on the kitchen, and the Thursday night dinners probably mean that we're going to need a commercial dishwasher soon. So looking out over what's coming in the future and what we're planning for and making it work is part of our budget goal this year and every year. So this is as close to the numbers as I'm going to get. The proposed budget this year includes a 19.5% increase in health insurance costs. That's not because we're giving anybody luxury health service. That's how much health insurance has gone up. So that's just something that we need to keep paying, and again, a way of showing our staff that we think they're important. We did a 2.8% cost of living increase for the staff. They have not gotten, I think they have gotten a cost of living increase, but no other increase for several years in a row. So this is another thing that we want to keep maintaining. We're trying to have a plan to bring salaries up to UUA recommended guidelines, which I talked about, and adding the quarter-time minister. Okay. We want to, as I said, offer 2 Sunday morning services and consider a third, which could be a totally different format. That's up to how the staff decides to do it. We tend to, one of the things that we usually do when we are trying to bridge the gap between the aspirational budget and the real budget with pledges, we almost always cut the amount of dues we pay to the UUA. They tell us, you know, based on our size and the amount of pledge money we have, about how much that our part of the Unitarian Universalist Association should cost. And almost every year we cut that because we just can't afford to do the whole amount. So we are working our way towards giving them the full dues that they deserve. They help us otherwise. They don't say, well, you only paid half of it, so we're only going to give you half the help. We get the help. They do president's meetings, they do treasurer's meetings, they do support for staff, they help us with difficult congregational members. They do a lot of work for us, and they don't cut it because we don't pay them the full amount, and we would like to also start doing that. And everybody knows everything is so expensive right now. And with the instability in the government and the gas prices and food prices, we're trying to hope that we can keep things pretty even so that we keep going and we have the money that we need to survive. We are lucky because the church is paid off. And when I go to the president's meetings, that's one of the scariest things that the other presidents talk about, is trying to make sure that they can stay. And there actually is, I believe, 1, maybe 2 churches here that are leaving their building and going to share a building with some other church because they can't afford to keep their buildings open. So we're in a really great position for that. The things that are not in this budget are, is this, John, I meant to ask you and I forgot. Does this mean we're not using reserve funding? That's what the no reserve funding means, right? We have used reserve funding in the past, and realistically, we probably will end up using a little bit more as we do this aspirational real budget balancing, but we've tried to make that less and less every year. And then we have a whole separate budget for the first time, I think, last year for capital projects. And there's an article and some other information if you're interested in all the stuff that we did this year. The list is this long. And we ended up paying for it, and we were in good shape. So we planned for a rainy day, and it worked out. So that is my part, and now John is going to come up and talk about the numbers. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me or Reverend Mary or John, and they can help you. So thank you.
See how tall this gets. I don't think it expands. So I'm John Cox. I'm the board treasurer. I am a very tall, youngish white guy. Today I'm wearing my vintage mustard yellow jacket, trying to keep things fresh. Okay, so I've got a few slides here on some of the budget numbers. So first, this one is just, I think it's a useful chart. It's a little bit better when you see it up close so you can see all the numbers. But what this basically is doing is showing the inflow and outflow. So where our revenue is coming from and where our expenses are going. So on the left-hand side, this is our revenue section. The largest chunk by far, of course, is our pledges. So that is the 726, I think this laser doesn't work very well, but the 726 is that pledge amount. There's a couple other sources of revenue in there. One is the share the plate is the next largest chunk, and then the auction, and we have a couple other smaller income sources as well. On the right-hand side are all the different expenses that are going out. So you can see the largest bar kind of in the center on the right there is the salary and wages. In between, in these two kind of middle sections, those are just, I guess, aggregating things up. So you see the salary and wages in the blue bar on the far right. The kind of orange big bar in the middle there is the personnel. So salary and wages make up the largest chunk of the personnel budget, but there are some other expenses that go along with that. Taxes, medical plans, etc. Some other things I want to point out just up in the top. So the bottom section there, that's the personnel, but looking up in the top right, those are all the other expenses that we have in the aspirational budget. The next largest one after personnel would be the resource ministry. So that is where you would find the UUA dues. So the budget, I can't quite read it, but I believe that's about $26,000 is the budgeted amount. In the past year, I think we did $10,000 for our actual budget. So that kind of tells you the gap there is something like $15,000, $16,000 that we have traditionally, I guess, underfunded that line item on the budget. I think that's probably the main things on there. Again, this is a very useful chart if you can read all the details. So I highly recommend. I believe we have some copies in the lobby floating around. So that is the overall look. Some other notes. So I mentioned other sources of income. So you obviously have all seen the big number for the pledge revenue budget, the $700,000+ number. Some other tweaks. So the share the plate, we've upped that one slightly, gone from 40,000 to 44, which I think reflects the larger number of people coming every Sunday. Our interest income, that number has also gone up from 7,500 to 10,000. I expect that this should be a little bit higher in the end. This is largely due to, we have a CD ladder that we've set up that has been doing quite well. So as long as interest rates stay decent, I think we'll see a good amount of interest coming from those investments. And then the other big thing to note is, as mentioned several times, there's no endowment draw in this aspirational budget. So that was not in the revenue side of that chart on the previous slide. Another note here just on reserves. So in the past fiscal year, of course, budgeted expenses did exceed the revenues, and we've just made up the difference through using unrestricted reserves, endowment draws, one-time gifts, etc. In the last fiscal year, I guess the current fiscal year, I should say, that came to about $43,000. We'll see by the time we get to the end of the year how much of that we actually ended up needing, but that was the amount that was approved. So the big difference in philosophy this year is asking for what we need. So instead of assuming with the aspirational budget that we'll be doing an endowment draw, we'll get there when we get there. So if we do end up having a gap between what is pledged and what we need, then we'll ask the congregation to approve drawdown, but if we don't need that, then that would be fantastic. Yep. Oh, Jim, yeah.
The number that's showing there, the first number,
Mhm.
FY,
Can we pass that microphone actually here?
FY 25-26 showing $43,000.
Yep.
Is that what you're going to draw this year to balance the budget out?
That was the approved amount for the current fiscal year for the combined use of, I believe that was the combined use of reserve funds as well as endowment draw. That was the max allowable based on the approved budget. So I don't have the actual numbers for what we've needed from that. That will be something that'll come out at the end of the fiscal year.
Does that include the capital money?
Does it include the capital money?
Well, it has in the past.
That I don't know.
Capital money's for capital expenses. So it's
No.
operational.
Okay, so no.
It's just operational.
To clarify the question, the coming year, we're going to have a separate capital budget.
Correct.
And I assume the congregation will be approving both an operating budget and a capital budget. So in relation to how we're so creative with our numbers, I'm just asking for a clarification this year of whether we're pulling money out of those traditional reserve funds that we've maintained.
For the current fiscal year?
Yes.
I know that there was a number approved. I mean, that's the number that was approved is the 43,000. I don't have on hand if we have had to tap that yet.
It was in your last financial report to the board. Last quarterly report. I think we had it in the last quarterly report to the board.
Do you remember what I said?
The numbers were in Reverend Mary's background information at the board meeting where we discussed this current ask, and also where the money for the last year's approved projects and where the money came from for those.
So I think what, as I lower it by 3 inches, I think what John is trying to say is that we don't know the total amount of the draw that will end in the fiscal 25-26 year because some things come out more. We've ended up spending less on some capital things. And so until the year is actually over and wrapped up, we don't know what the final draw will be. The decision we made this year is not to assume that we're going to do a reserve draw for the 26-27 year. Realistically, we will probably end up adding some back, but we have a stated goal that we're going to make that smaller every time. We've also been given some really generous donations by people to do things like fix the kitchen. And so those are unexpected things that weren't planned for that we then don't have to withdraw money for. So we don't really find out how it shakes out for the 25-26 year until the whole year is over. And we don't really know what we're going to suggest as the draw for the 26-27 year until we rationalize the aspirational in the final budget. And the other part of that is, even if we approve, whatever, $30,000, we don't really know if it'll be $30,000 for the same situation. So next year, we'll be telling you, we approved X amount of money as a withdrawal, but we're only going to have to take this much because other sources of income have come in. So it's kind of a fluid thing. It's a hard question to answer. My assumption is that we're going to have to suggest that we withdraw some, but the pledges are actually in really good shape right now, which he's going to talk about in a minute. So that's just kind of information we don't really have. And we are very blessed that we have it in the bank, and also that the board is trying really hard not to use it, because that is our long-term financial stability. So it's a hard question to answer just because that's kind of the last information we find out. but they're not allowed to go over, I think it's 10%, it's in the governance manual. They can't go over a certain percentage of the draw without getting reapproval. So when John has said, well, that's what we approved. Yeah, whatever it is, there is a stated amount that if we need more money than that, we have to go back to the board for approval. And I don't know if do we have to go back to the congregation? Sally is the governance goddess, so. So that's the answer to that question, is we really don't know, and we really don't know how much we're going to suggest because we don't know the difference between what people pledge and what we've asked for, and we don't know what other things we're going to find out. We might have a really creative idea and not need that. So, because we're going to do a lot of work in April to make sure that we're doing the fiscally responsible thing for the church, long-term, not just short-term. Anne?
It's just occurred to me, I've never really understood what the reserve funds are. Where do they come from? Is it leftover?
Sally?
They come from a number of sources. The Capital Campaign Fund is a restricted fund, and that came from a 3-year campaign where the congregation donated toward capital improvements, towards various capital items. The Building Major Maintenance Fund, that's such a tiny amount. I don't know how long that's been hanging around, that $2,600. And Legacy Gift balance, unrestricted, the $127,000, is because a congregation member made a donation to the congregation. And legacy means it was in their estate, it was in their will, and they donated to OUUC. And that's unrestricted, meaning they didn't say in their will, I'm going to donate $5,000 and I want you to use it to repaint the building. So that would be restricted. This is unrestricted, so we can tap into that. And that's how George Lanning, when George Lanning left a legacy gift, most of that amount was unrestricted. Does that help?
And I also want to point out that the legacy gifts balance here does not include the endowment, which is a separate beast. So the endowment fund, I should have put it on here, but that one is currently sitting at $780,000. And that's the 4% that was mentioned, the maximum, the amount that we can withdraw from that, which I know I worked that out to something around $30,000. So that, again, that'll come up if we don't hit our pledge targets, et cetera, but that's another bucket that we can draw from if needed. Okay, actually, before I go on to this, are there any other questions on the budget itself? Next section is about the current state of the pledge campaign. All right. Okay, so what we have here, this is actually looking at the current fiscal year. So this is the pledges from last year, I guess the last 10 months, 9 months of pledge data. And what this chart is basically showing where we get our budget from, where we get the pledge revenue from. The real point that this is trying to drive home is that all different levels of pledgers are making a big difference in our overall budget. So you see the 4 colors here in the chart. Each color represents 1/4 of the total revenue from pledges. So the blue group, that is about $140,000 of the total of $568,000. The orange group is the next $140,000 tranche. The red, the same thing. Teal, the same thing. So each group kind of is a big contributor. And as you see, each of these groups is just, like I said, a different amount of pledge volume per year. So that blue group, that is folks who are donating on average $810 per year, all the way up to the teal group, which is just 15 people who each represent about $9,600 per year. So each of these groups contributes to that initial, the pledge revenue that we see. And it's all, of course, greatly appreciated. So this all takes me to the current update. So we heard these numbers a little bit earlier, but just to reiterate, so the big ask this year is the $726,479 for our aspirational budget. That is in comparison with last year's goal of $576,155, so a fairly large increase of about $150,000. And as of yesterday, we were at 533,703 with 165 pledgers. So we've got a decent chunk to go, but we've made huge progress, and that is where I'd like to end it. So any other questions about the current state of things? Yeah, Bernie.
How many pledging units do we have? How many pledging units do we have?
That is a fantastic question. Do you have any idea? Is that?
I should know, but I don't.
I didn't mean it to be a fantasy.
I don't know the actual number. I want to say it's in the 250 range, but I don't have a basis for that.
It's out here on there.
Oh, yeah.
So if you go back a slide, look at, so 170.
Oh, count these up.
47 plus 27 for 15. Now granted, that's from July 25 to June 26 of this year. How many pledging units we'll have for this year, don't know, but that's roughly 75,
260?
265, I would say.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Well, if there are any other questions, we do have an FAQ section here. We've got just on the stewardship section of the website. All these details can be found there. But yeah, thank you all for coming. I don't know if there's,
I'm going to just do the.
yeah.
I want to thank John for being treasurer so the rest of us didn't have to. Yeah, I agree. So thank you very much. Come with your questions on the 7th, and that's the time where we will really have all the budget numbers and the line items, and you can ask to your heart's content, and we will do our best. There are backup slides at the end of this slide presentation that have a ton of actually kind of granular data that I just wanted us to have, and it's from the stewardship talking points. And so there probably are some of the answers, I didn't even think of it until just now. Probably some of the questions you've asked are answered in the backup slides of this when they're sent out. So thank you so much for being here. Please feel free to ask questions. Be prepared to come on June 7th. The budget will be released and you can analyze it. And again, I just want to say that I think we have really great staff. I think we're doing a good job trying to pay them well, we can't really pay them what they're worth because that's not how the world works, but making their lives work as well as they can and not asking them to work for free. And I'm very grateful that we have the congregation that we do. People are generous. George Lanning did the whole heating system, I think, or pretty close to it. So we have had some very lucky donations, everything from a new dishwasher to a new refrigerator. People are really generous about OUUC, I think, because they feel as if we are trying to do things that make their lives better, especially when things are the way they are in the wider world now. Gas is expensive, everybody's scared about everything all the time, and this feels like a safe place to me. So I really appreciate that we exist. I'm going to, of course I grabbed the wrong, there we are. Okay, and just to extinguish the chalice, I'm going to use the other half of our OUUC statement. We recognize and acknowledge the impact of growth and change on our faith community. OUUC has grown and thrived through more than a decade of transition that included several changes in ministers, a global pandemic, and a national government that challenges our core values and commitments in a time of climate crisis and war. So remember that our mission is to welcome and wonder, embrace and empower, bridge and become. Thank you for your time, and feel free to reach out and ask any questions you have.